Some families passed down heirlooms, others passed down traditions. Mine, we had a farm, a 150-year-old farm to be exact, older than the town itself.
Welcome to Karen Chronicles. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
My great-great-grandfather built it after the Civil War, back when this entire area was just open land and dirt roads. Over the generations, it had been passed down, cared for, and protected. It wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. But as time went on, the world changed. The once rural landscape started filling up with new developments. Businesses popped up, and before I knew it, the city had expanded all around me. And that's when the HOA problem began. The HOA moves in a few years ago. A large subdivision was built just beyond my property line. It was called Willow Creek Estates, a cookie-cutter neighborhood filled with identical houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and HOA rules as long as a novel. I didn't think much of it at first. Their community, their rules. I wasn't part of it, but apparently they wanted me to be. The first HOA invitation. One morning, I checked my mailbox and found a thick envelope. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates HOA." I frowned. I opened the letter, and inside was a friendly invitation to join the HOA voluntarily. The letter highlighted all the benefits I would receive. Access to their community pool. I had my own. Weekly trash pickup. I already had a service. Lawn maintenance, I managed my own land, and of course a reasonable monthly fee of $250. I tossed the letter in the trash. I wasn't interested. The persistence begins, but the HOA, they didn't take no for an answer. A week later, another letter arrived. And then another. Each one was slightly more aggressive than the last. At first, it was all polite invitations. Then the wording shifted. "You may not realize that your property shares a boundary with Willow Creek Estates, and as such your home impacts our community standards. Many homeowners have already opted to join. Don't be left out. Failure to comply with HOA expectations may result in further actions to ensure neighborhood uniformity." That last one sounded a lot like a threat. A knock at the door one afternoon. I was out repairing a section of my fence when I heard a car pull up. I turned around to see a woman in a blazer and a man in khakis stepping onto my land, clipboard in hand, fake smiles on their faces. "Good afternoon," the woman chirped. "I'm Linda, president of the Willow Creek HOA, and this is Mark, our compliance officer. We've been reaching out, but we haven't heard back from you." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Yeah, I got your letters. I'm not interested." Mark's smile tightened. "Oh, we totally understand. But we wanted to stop by personally because we really believe that everyone benefits from HOA membership." I raised an eyebrow. "Even people who aren't in the HOA?" Linda chuckled like I'd just said something silly. "Well, technically you're adjacent to the community, so your property is still visible to members. And we want to ensure that all nearby homes maintain the same aesthetic quality." I stared at her. "You mean you don't like looking at a farm?" She gave a tight-lipped smile. "Let's just say that modernizing would be in everyone's best interest." I crossed my arms. "This farm has been here since the 1870s. It was here before your neighborhood, before this town, and before you were even born. It's not going anywhere," Linda sighed. "I was hoping we could handle this amicably." Then Mark pulled out a folder. "Before you make any final decisions," he said, flipping through the papers, "just know that refusing to cooperate could lead to unnecessary legal headaches." I took a step closer. "Are you threatening me, Mark?" His fake confidence wavered. "Oh, no, of course not. We just want to make sure you understand that joining the HOA would make things much simpler for everyone." I smiled. "Let me make this simple for you." Then I pointed at my house. "This farm was here long before you. It's privately owned, and you have no legal authority here." Linda's smile disappeared. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I leaned forward. You want me to join? Take me to court. See how that works out for you. They didn't like that answer, but they left. For now, the fight was just beginning. I watched as their fancy HOA car drove away, kicking up dust on my gravel road. Something told me this wasn't over, because people like Linda and Mark, they don't give up. And I had a feeling that the next move wouldn't be so friendly. I knew the HOA wasn't going to back down easily. People like Linda and Mark, the ones who live for control and power, they don't just accept no as an answer. But even knowing that, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Because this time, they weren't just harassing me. They were coming for my home. The fake HOA fees, Few weeks after my last run-in with the HOA, I found another thick envelope in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was just another invitation to join their little dictatorship, but when I opened it, my blood boiled. Final notice. Past due HOA fees. Immediate payment required. I stared at the paper, my hands clenching. The letter claimed that I owed $1,250 in unpaid HOA dues for a membership I never signed up for. But the worst part, the bill claimed that these fees had been accumulating for 5 years. I had only lived here for 3. I laughed. They weren't even good at fraud. At the bottom of the letter, a bold red warning stood out. Failure to pay will result in legal action, including a potential lien on your property. I clenched my jaw. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They were trying to steal my home. HOA tries to place a lien on my farm. A few days later, I got a call from my bank. Mr., my last name, we received a notification regarding an attempt to place a lien on your property due to unpaid HOA fees. We wanted to verify this with you before proceeding. I almost dropped my phone. They actually tried it. For those who don't know, an HOA Lien is a legal claim that can lead to foreclosure if unpaid. It's how HOAs force homeowners into submission. Only problem, I wasn't in their HOA. I took a deep breath. I never agreed to their HOA. This is fraudulent. The bank representative sighed. I figured as much. We're rejecting the lien request, but I highly recommend you get legal representation. They may escalate further. I thanked them and hung up, and then I called a lawyer, bringing in the legal big guns. Hired Ethan Carter, a real estate attorney with a reputation for shutting down corrupt HOAs. The moment I showed him the letter, he whistled. Oh, they really screwed up, he said. They have zero legal authority over your land. This is a textbook case of fraud and attempted extortion. He cracked his knuckles. Let's make them regret it. Firing back, the cease and desist letter within 48 hours, Ethan sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they immediately revoke all fraudulent claims against my property. Acknowledge in writing that I am not part of their HOA. Cease all further contact or face legal consequences. A week later, an HOA representative called Ethan. And let's just say, it didn't go well for them. The HOA's weak defense, Karen, the HOA's lawyer, tried to argue that my property was adjacent to Willow Creek Estates, so it should be considered part of the community. Ethan laughed. That's not how property law works, he said. Your client is attempting to enforce rules on a property they don't own. That's called fraud. Karen stammered. Well, there are gray areas in HOA enforcement. Ethan cut her off. No, there aren't. Either he signed the HOA agreement or he didn't, and he didn't. Your client has 10 days to drop this nonsense, or we're filing a lawsuit for fraud, harassment, and attempted unlawful foreclosure. Karen went silent. Then she muttered something about reviewing with the board and hung up. The HOA backs off. For now, a week later, I got another letter from the HOA. This time, it was a retraction. All fees were cancelled. They withdrew the fraudulent lien request. They admitted that my property was not under HOA jurisdiction. It was a win, but I wasn't celebrating yet, because something told me they weren't done. And when people like this get desperate, they get dangerous. The HOA had already tried everything to force me under their control. Fake HOA fees didn't work. Illegal lien on my property. Got thrown out. Harassment and threats. I shut them down with my lawyer. But just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, they did. Because this time, Karen forged my dead father's signature. The new evidence from the HOAA. Few days after my lawyer shut down their fake lien attempt, I received an urgent letter from the HOA. At first, I thought it was another empty threat. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Dear Mr., my last name, it has come to our attention that you have refused to acknowledge your family's prior agreement with the Willow Creek HOA. However, after further review, we have uncovered an official contract signed by your father, legally binding your property to HOA regulations. Attached was a scanned contract. At the bottom, my father's signature. I felt sick. My father had never signed anything related to an HOA. He hated bureaucracy, hated control. He had raised me to fight back against people like Karen. And the worst part? According to the date on the contract, my father had supposedly signed this document while he was in the hospital, undergoing major surgery. Checking the facts, I sat down with my lawyer, Ethan, and laid the contract in front of him. He studied it for less than 10 seconds before scoffing. "This is the worst forgery I've ever seen," he said. I frowned. "How can you tell?" Ethan smirked. "Look at the signature." I did. At first it looked normal, but then I noticed the letters were shaky, inconsistent, like someone had copied it by hand. The signature was slightly different from my father's actual legal documents. And most importantly, the date. I pulled out my father's medical records. On the exact day Karen claimed he signed this contract, he was under anesthesia, in surgery. There was no way he could have signed anything. Confronting the HOA armed. With my evidence, Ethan sent a formal demand to the HOA. Provide an original notarized copy of the contract. Explain how my father signed a contract while in surgery. Prepare for legal consequences if they couldn't. Karen's weak excuse. Few days later, Karen actually called Ethan. Her voice was shaky but still trying to sound confident. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she claimed. "Maybe there was an error in the records." Ethan laughed. "An error? You forged a dead man's signature." Karen went silent. "You know," Ethan continued, "forgery is a felony. If you don't formally retract this fraudulent contract and issue a written apology, we're taking this to court. And trust me, this case will make headlines." More silence. Then Karen sighed. "I need to talk to the board." "You do that," Ethan said. "You have 24 hours. The HOA's embarrassing retraction. The very next day, I received a new letter from the HOA. They rescinded the contract due to clerical errors. They apologized for any confusion. They admitted I was not part of the HOA. They didn't admit to the forgery. But they knew, and they knew I knew. The fallout. Karen tried to act like nothing happened, but words started spreading among the HOA board. Some members were furious when they learned about the forgery. Others distanced themselves from Karen, and a few even quit the HOA altogether. Karen wasn't off the hook yet, because if she thought this was over, she was dead wrong. Karen had forged my dead father's signature and gotten caught. She had tried to steal my land through fake liens and fraudulent contracts. And when none of that worked, she did what all desperate, power-hungry HOA tyrants do. She sued me. The key ridiculous lawsuit. Few days after I exposed Karen's forgery, I received a formal court summons. She was suing me for breach of HOA contract, which I had never signed. Unpaid fees, which had already been ruled fraudulent. Defamation, for damaging her reputation by exposing the forgery. And the craziest part, assault. Yep, Karen claimed that I physically attacked her when I went to the HOA office. I actually laughed out loud when I read it, because not only was it completely false, I had proof. Building my case, I immediately called Ethan, my lawyer. He sighed. I was wondering how long it would take before she pulled something like this. I handed over the lawsuit papers. How bad is it? Ethan smirked. Oh, it's bad. But not for you. We went through her so-called claims one by one. Breach of HOA contract. The judge had already ruled that I was not in the HOA. Case closed. Unpaid fees, already dismissed in court. Defamation. The truth isn't defamation. We had evidence of her forgery, fraud, and illegal lien attempts. Assault, that's where it got really funny. Because on the day she claimed, I attacked her at the HOA office, I was at the county clerk's office filing paperwork against her. And I had timestamped security footage to prove it. Karen had just dug her own grave. Court day, the HOA's embarrassment. The courtroom was packed. Karen sat at the HOA's table, looking smug in a formal blazer. Bob sat beside her, sweating through his cheap suit. I sat at my table, calm and collected. Ethan leaned over and whispered, "This is going to be fun." The judge, an older woman with zero patience for nonsense, looked over Karen's lawsuit. Then she sighed. "Ms. Reynolds," she said, rubbing her temples. "Before we proceed, let me clarify. Mr., my last name, is not part of the HOA, correct?" Karen cleared her throat. "Well, Your Honor, we believe there was an implied agreement." The judge held up a hand. "Yes or no?" Karen's jaw tightened. No," the judge nodded. "Then let's move on to the more concerning accusation, assault." Karen immediately launched into her performance. "Your Honor, I was simply doing my job when Mr. My Name came into our office, furious over HOA policies. He lunged at me, shoved my papers to the floor, and threatened me. I felt unsafe and violated." The judge looked at me. "Mr. My last name. Do you have a response?" I smiled. "Yes, Your Honor. I wasn't even there." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Explain." I pulled out my evidence. Time-stamped security footage of me at the county clerk's office during the exact time of the assault. A notarized affidavit from the clerk, confirming I was filing paperwork that day. HOA office camera footage showing Karen sitting at her desk alone. The room went silent. Karen's face went pale. The judge took a deep breath. "Ms. Reynolds, do you have any evidence to support your claim?" Karen stammered. "Well, the security cameras weren't working that day, but..." The judge's face darkened. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that the HOA office cameras conveniently stopped working on the one day you claim you were assaulted?" Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The judge sat back in her chair. "I've heard enough." The judge's ruling Karen's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. The HOA was officially ordered to drop their fraudulent lien on my property. Karen was fined for wasting the court's time. The HOA was warned that any further legal harassment would result in severe penalties. Karen sat there shaking with rage. Bob refused to look at me. I stood up, shook my lawyer's hand, and walked out victorious. But I knew. Karen wasn't done. Because people like her, they never know when to quit. Karen had spent months trying to take my home. Fake HOA fees, failed, illegal lien, shut down, forgery of my father's signature, exposed, a ridiculous lawsuit, dismissed in court. But now it was my turn to go on the offensive. Because Karen hadn't just harassed me, she had broken the law, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Building the case against Karen, after we obliterated Karen's lawsuit, my lawyer, Ethan, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You know," he said, "we have more than enough to sue them for harassment." I nodded. "Let's do it." But Ethan held up a hand. "Hold on. Let's make sure we hit every crime they've committed." Fraud. She forged a legal contract, harassment, non-stop false fines and legal threats. Defamation, accusing me of assault in court. Financial misconduct? That's when things got interesting. See, when we dug deeper, we found something much bigger than my case. Karen wasn't just harassing homeowners, she was stealing from them. The HOA's dirty secret Ethan hired a forensic accountant to go through the HOA's financial records. What he found blew the whole case wide open. Over $200,000 missing from the HOA's accounts, payments rerouted to a consulting firm that didn't exist. And guess whose personal bank account was receiving consulting fees? Karen. Filing the lawsuit. With everything we uncovered, Ethan prepared a lawsuit so devastating it would bury Karen and the HOA for good. We sued for harassment and defamation for the fake assault claim, fraud for forging my father's signature, illegal financial practices for stealing HOA funds, and since HOA members had also been victims of her fraud, we made it a class action lawsuit. It wasn't just me versus Karen anymore. It was the entire community, the courtroom showdown. The courtroom was packed. Karen looked worn out, stressed, and barely holding it together, because now she was the one on trial. Ethan stood up. Your Honor, not only has the defendant repeatedly harassed my client, but we have evidence that she has been embezzling funds from the HOA. Karen's lawyer immediately objected. The judge looked over the bank records we submitted. He frowned. Ms. Reynolds, can you explain why HOA funds were being deposited into your personal account? Karen's face turned white. Those were reimbursements for... The judge held up a hand. Stop. We will be ordering a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Karen's jaw dropped. She looked around like she was waiting for someone to save her. But the HOA board? They were dead silent, because they knew. They had blindly followed Karen. And now, she was taking them all down with her, the final verdict. Karen was removed as HOA president immediately. The HOA was ordered to pay $500,000 in damages to homeowners. My property was officially ruled outside of HOA control, forever. But the best part, the judge turned to Karen. Ms. Reynolds, based on the evidence, we are referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Karen's mouth fell open. She started stammering, shaking her head violently. But I was just... The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The fallout. Karen faces prison. Karen was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. She lost everything, her job, her home, her reputation. The HOA collapsed, and a new board was formed, one that actually followed the law. And me, for the first time in months, I finally had peace. No more threats, no more fake violations, just my land, my home, and my family's legacy, untouched. And Karen, she was about to learn what it felt like to lose control, because the next time she saw the inside of a courtroom, she'd be wearing handcuffs. For months, Karen and the HOA had done everything in their power to take my land. Fake fines and illegal liens, shut down, forgery of my father's signature, exposed, false assault charges, thrown out in court, HOA-wide fraud and embezzlement, discovered. Now it was finally over, and it wasn't just a victory for me. It was a reckoning for Karen, the HOA's public humiliation. The week after the court's ruling, the Willow Creek HOA was forced to issue a public statement. They officially retracted all false fines and violations. They admitted that my property was not under HOA control. They formally apologized, not just to me, but to the entire community. It was a massive embarrassment. For years, Karen had ruled like a dictator. Now, she had been exposed as a fraud. Karen's ultimate downfall, Karen, had lost the lawsuit. She had lost the HOA presidency, but the worst was yet to come. Because after the forensic audit revealed she had been embezzling HOA funds, her troubles weren't just civil, they were criminal. She was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board. She was sued by multiple homeowners for fraud. She was under active criminal investigation for embezzlement. Her entire reputation was in shambles. And the HOA board, they wanted nothing to do with her anymore. So in a final humiliating vote, Karen was officially removed from the HOA forever. The very organization she had ruled over for years had thrown her out like trash. The farm remains untouched. With Karen gone and the HOA stripped of power, my farm was safe. No more threats, no more fake contracts, no more HOA tyranny. I stood on my porch looking out at the same land my family had owned for generations, land that Karen had tried and failed to take from me. And I knew it would stay in my family forever. The final message: Karen had believed she was untouchable. She thought she could bend the rules, fabricate lies, and control others. But in the end, her own arrogance destroyed her. Because bullies only win when people are too afraid to fight back. And when you stand your ground, when you know your rights, gather your evidence, and refuse to back down, you win. Every time, the end, or just the beginning. Karen may be gone, but if I've learned anything, HOA drama never truly dies. Because somewhere, in some other neighborhood, another Karen is waiting. And if she comes for me, she'd better be ready to lose. Life lessons from the HOA tyrant's downfall. Protecting your rights and legacy. This story is more than just a battle with an HOA. It's a lesson in standing your ground, protecting what's yours, and never letting bullies win. One of the most important takeaways is the power of knowing your rights. Karen and the HOA operated under the assumption that no one would question them. They believed their authority was absolute simply because they said so. But laws exist for a reason, and when the homeowner educated himself and hired legal help, the HOA's entire scheme fell apart. Another key lesson is persistence. The fight wasn't won overnight. It took time, patience, and resilience. When facing corruption, the easiest option is to give up and comply. But that's how people like Karen continue to thrive. The homeowner refused to back down, and in the end, justice prevailed. This story also highlights the danger of unchecked power. Karen had spent years controlling others, making up rules, and using fear to get what she wanted. But as soon as someone challenged her with facts and evidence, her empire crumbled. Power without accountability always leads to corruption and downfall. Lastly, this story is a reminder that your home and your legacy matter. Whether it's a farm that's been in your family for generations or a small house you worked hard to, no one has the right to take that from you. If someone tries, fight for it, because in the end, the people who stand up for themselves always win.